It's Tuesday afternoon at 4 p.m. in Switzerland. It's Space Café WebTalk time. Our Space Café WebTalk, 33 minutes with Professor Chris Newman, will begin soon. Thanks for joining us for this very informative and definitely very inspiring talk today about UK space policy, Back to the Future. As always, we really appreciate your participation and ongoing feedback. I'm Thorsten Kriening, your host today and publisher of SpaceWatch.Global. We are a Switzerland-based online platform for information in and about space and new space activities in a geopolitical context. I know many of you already are familiar with our website, our bi-weekly and our daily newsletters, and our Space Café podcasts, which are first to listen if you like space. We are also opened our fan shop online where you can support us actively and become a space watcher, as you can see here. Edition 1 has cool mugs, masks, and awesome t-shirts for you, your friends, and the ones you love. Your support is really needed to keep our independent journalism alive. If you've missed any of our previous web talks, we have an archive available on our website in the events section and on YouTube. We host our Space Café Web Talks live on a weekly basis. It's already the 25th edition, so sounds like it's our silver wedding anniversary today, and that's with you, Chris. That's great. I hope you mark Tuesdays at the same time in your calendar. Today, I'm very honored to be joined by a very good friend and one of the most inspiring people I know in our industry. And now I have to say it really the German way, Professor Dr. Chris Newman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be here.
Thanks, Chris. Chris, for all of you that doesn't know him, Chris is a professor of space law and policy at the Northumbria University in Newcastle. He has been active in teaching and research of space law for over 2 decades and has published extensively on legal and ethical underpinnings of space governance. He has published numerous articles on space law, in particular the interaction of regulation law policy in the space industry. He has co-written the books Frontiers of Risk in Space on the variety of risks involved in human space activities. He is a member of the International Institute of Space Law, and Chris is working with Astroscale UK on legal aspects of decommissioning and lessons that space can learn from other industries. He is also collaborating with Northern Space and Security on a number of projects, most notable the Space Law Games, a cross-disciplinary attempt to examine our liability on on-orbit operations. And we will hear about it more in a second. With that, I'm very proud to welcome you, Chris, in my show. So let's get it started. What gets you up these days, Chris, as a professor? And what are these space law games? Please enlighten us.
I will do, Thorsten. Thank you so much. And as I say, it's great to be sort of sitting in the cafe with so many previous alumni behind me. And, you know, what I'm hoping today is that I can sort of inspire some questions, some ideas, and some engagement. One of the things I think that more than anything, the industry and we in academia need is collaboration. I'm hungry for collaboration, and that's kind of where the Space Law Games comes in. It was an idea that came out of the Global Space Traffic Management Workshop, where, you know, one of the I think it was Matt Bold from Lockheed Martin posed the question: well, have we ever done a war game of a civilian incident in space? And we said no. I said, interesting, because we have something similar, you know, in law. We call them moots, where we sort of toss around legal concepts and legal ideas, intractable legal problems, and we put the two together, and the law games started to take on a life of its own. So what we're really looking at is a collaboration of industry, of academia, of military, of state regulators, all coming together to try and address this sort of legal grey area that exists with liability in on-orbit operations. We're going to try and use these two methodologies to produce I want to say a simulation, but I think it's more than a simulation. It's almost a series of decision-making trees and decision options whereby we can examine where's the evidence going to come from. If we're going to make bold claims about, you know, satellite A colliding with satellite B, we're going to have to try and determine, well, how are we going to back that up? How are we going to actually get an evidential standard of proof that's going to be acceptable to a tribunal in the way that we can do on Earth? Now, some things we can prove and some things we cannot prove. And I think that's what we're looking for here in the space law games. We're looking for the cracks. Where is the evidence going to fall down, and what's going to be the difficulty? So that's kind of what we're looking at here. We're looking at how do we identify the roles and responsibilities of operators and of space agencies to prevent events. And if an event does happen, how are we going to determine responsibility after that? So I think this is one of the things I'm really excited about researching and being involved in, because I think we're looking at almost the granular detail. We've moved on from the grand principles, and we're now talking about the granular detail of, okay, you're saying that I bashed into your satellite, prove it. And that's what we're looking at.
Wow, that sounds like the space law games have enough food for a separate space cafe or even more. So
absolutely.
Let's think about that, because, hey, our time is short here with 3 minutes. Just coming back to the topic, we put out the UK space policy, Back to the Future. Why Back to the Future?
Well, I think it's kind of I think it's really interesting that UK space activity has gone sort of 180 degrees in the last 40, 50 years. We did have a launch capability. We had, Black Arrow, which was developed during the 1960s, capable of launching payloads of around about 150 kilograms to LEO. We had 2 successful launches, one in March 1970, and then the satellite-bearing rocket launched in October 1971. And then we withdrew. We actually voluntarily gave up having launch capacity. Now, there was various reasons for that, and some of them valid, some of them weren't. But we're now looking to go back to get that launch capacity again. If we had a rocket that could deliver 150 kilogram payloads to LEO, I think we'd be very happy, and that's what I suspect a number of these spaceports are going to do. So we are looking backwards, but we're actually very much looking forwards in the UK, trying with a series of modern initiatives and the establishment of a number of spaceports around the UK. Predominantly Scotland, kind of given the geographical advantage for polar orbit, but there's lots of collaborative workers going on. The Scottish Space Leadership Council, there's consultation on spaceflight regulations. We've got Skyrora, we've got Orbex. So there's a whole range of activity. It's getting a bit of momentum, and we're now looking towards doing that. And one thing I'm going to say, I know I sound sort of quite upbeat and quite cheerful. I'm not a cheerleader for the UK Space Agency. I'm not a cheerleader for UK Space. There are, hurdles that need to be overcome. The launch market, the small sat launch market, is going to become increasingly competitive. So I think there's a number of questions that the industry in the UK needs to start thinking about and needs to start answering. But at least we're looking in the right direction.
Just as a disclaimer, we have people from the UK Space Agency at least registered for this event. So I hope that will not make your career, or it does not have an impact on your career. Otherwise, just give us a call and we will find ways around. However,
every time I open my mouth, there's the danger I'm going to torpedo my career. So,
okay, got it. In our pre-talk, you used UK and space power in one sentence, which I thought was fascinating. What is your definition of a space power, and how do you see the UK there today or tomorrow, maybe?
This is one of those things. I used it as a sort of a shorthand. I'm not sure that concepts of space power are actually really useful. I think what we've got space policy and space capability, which all wrap around and fit in, not just foreign policy. If we were having this conversation 25, 30 years ago, maybe it would be a branch of foreign policy. But actually, space, certainly in the UK, is viewed principally, I would argue, through a commercial lens, through a civil lens, as a way of generating money. The first sort of stirrings as we moved from, not giving any money to the International Space Station and moving through to starting to generate and look at the case for space, the economic case for space. It was very much economic drivers that pushed the UK forward and that sort of incentivized respective governments to get involved. So I think space power as a term is kind of a shorthand, but I'm not quite sure what it's a shorthand for. as we move forward, as we move forward in time, because actually there is economic sort of capability, there is technical prowess, there is ability to be part of the supply chain, there's part of, downstream capability. So I think when I talk about UK as space power, what I'm really sort of talking about is a forward-looking space policy, looking to utilize and develop the opportunities put forward by space. I don't think in terms of the military, I'm not an expert in the military area. I have some awareness of the discussions that are going on in that arena, but really truly as an outsider looking into it, I think we're still very much a fledgling sort of player in that game. But I think in terms of the commercial side of things, I think we are looking to develop, and we're looking to generate money from it. It's the old Henry Ford thing. What are we looking to do here? Are we looking to go to space? Well, yes, but we're looking to go to space because we're looking to make money.
Okay, got it. Interesting thoughts. Let's talk about launchpads. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. How do you see them in competition with the European launchpads, or Scandinavia, Northern Sea, our new German one, or Portugal, with Russia, with India, with all these established player? Not to forget, I heard there should be some launches from the US as well these days. So.
Yeah, we've got our friends in New Zealand and Australia also looking at launch. We've got China. You're right. The launch market is becoming, again, I think at the time of the initial negotiation, there was a discussion amongst sort of UK space and amongst the commercial providers. Well, what's the problem? And one of the problems I think was felt at the time was there was this bottleneck for getting small satellites into space. There was this sort of launch bottleneck, and a natural sort of avenue presented itself. Well, hey, if we get launch capacity, certainly to LEO, to put them in polar orbit, then we can do that. I think the thing that it's important to remember, and I speak to the policymakers, is that as the old song goes, everybody's doing it. Everybody's recognizing this opportunity. So where once was a sort of a clear run at the market, we now have all these different space ideas. We all have these sort of different players and these different protagonists coming forward. Some ideas are great, some ideas are not so great, but they're still being put forward, and they're still being, they're still in that marketplace. So I think the UK has to be sort of quick now. I think the time for talking and the time for strategizing and the time for, thinking this is great, I think that's sort of gone. And we now at the stage where we're saying, okay, New Zealand with the, a very specific business model, but New Zealand are putting small payloads up there. We've got India putting payloads up there. We've got, Australia eyeing it. We've got a lot of nations that are thinking about doing it. So we have to get on with it.
So that means if New Zealand is doing it, you have to do it as well? That's behind?
I think there's a number of nations that are doing it.
That's
I mean,
right.
I pick on New Zealand because they're a manifest example of it. But they passed their Space Activities Act in 2016, I think, and they were launching a couple of years later. We passed ours in 2018, so the time lag is there. So I think if we're looking around at comparative nations, if we're looking around at nations looking to fill the same place in the marketplace that we are, we have to be honest about where we're at and what we're going to be doing. And there are nations that are launching now that weren't launching when we were planning that. So we have to be there.
Coming back on the space power, and it shouldn't sound like sarcasm. I never would do that. So, but can we speak about your view on OneWeb? I mean, you as a UK taxpayer, you own now partially OneWeb, so it's yours. What are you going to do with it?
Yeah, really interesting. I think it took a lot of people by surprise, myself included. And I'm going to speak, not sarcastically, but it's interesting to note that one of the things I always see is private sector companies saying that they're more agile, they're more, they're able to take account of space and, in a way that big lumbering state entities can't. And yet it's a big lumbering state entity that's bailing out a private sector company. So I think, that's one of the first things I'm going to say, that we need to think, what are we actually doing with OneWeb? Are we investing in a communications system? Are we investing in internet from space? Are we looking to legitimately put a competitor up there to Starlink, to Amazon, or are we looking to do something else? And I think, to be honest with you, I'm not sure that the UK government has an answer for that. I think initially the answer was this could be a cut price GNSS system, or at least PNT system. And I've seen various tweets, I've seen various discussions as to how that might be accomplished. I've also seen discussions saying that we've bought the wrong satellites if we want to do that. Now, okay, that's slightly mischievous. But what I do think is that it shows the ambition of the UK government. I think it shows the speed at which the decision was made. I think it shows that the new National Space Council, which is a council made up of politicians, it's a political body that feeds into government policy making and government decision making. I think it shows that that had a real voice. I think the Chancellor of the Exchequer was instrumental in doing that. So I think the first thing I'm going to say is I think it's optimistic in the extreme to expect that the $500 million will stay at 500 million. I think there's going to be initial, some more investment required. So I'm going to want even more of it. I think also that we need to think, what is it going to do? What do we want it for? Is it a commercial venture? The partners that we're in with, Bharti Global, they're clearly in it for commercial gain. So I think there's going to be a number of questions that we don't yet know the answer to. I know there was some misgivings, internally within the government about buying it, but I think we've got it now. The money's been spent. So we now have to make some serious sort of decisions as to what we're going to do with it and focus on that. Because I think if we try and spread the butter too thinly across the bread, we're going to lose focus. And there are other, providers who are going to be laser-like in the focus.
Okay, got it. I mean, for me, as an outsider, I would say, hey, it could be that easy that just Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty applied, and OneWeb was a UK company, and now the government has these assets, or to take care of these assets. So whatever that means. So and I think the rest is we have to see. But then at least it was an interesting move. Yeah, one of the answers that was in the press for that was, of course, Brexit. I mean, we have to talk about Brexit, and I feel sorry for that. But how will your space journey as a country, of course, be affected by that?
So whenever somebody from the UK speaks about Brexit, they will have a stance, they will have a side of the fence that they're on. And I am unashamedly sort of European, and I think that leaving the European Union was a terrible mistake. My countrymen disagree with me, so that's where we're at. And I think that as we go forward, we will see more and more that leaving the European Union isn't initially going to present us with a great deal of advantages. But we are where we are. We've got to deal the hand that we're playing. Yeah. Every sort of political decision, I think, is now viewed through the prism of Brexit. I think it is really sort of interesting. I think space activity is absolutely part of that discussion as well, and the fact of the matter is we had access to the single market, which was unfettered. We no longer have unfettered access to the single market. That is going to impact on competitiveness. There's no two ways about it. So I think from that point of view, there are workarounds in place, but there's workarounds. Then it's not the same. So I think in that sense, I think in the other sense, and I noticed Daniel Porras asked a question about the proposed resolution at the UN. I think what we're seeing is there's going to be a desperate sort of attempt by the government to reposition itself following Brexit. Yeah. What the UK government are going to have to try and do is say, okay, we're not closed for business. And in fact, we're open as global Britain, I believe is the phrase that they use at the time. So we are now global Britain. And how they do that, I think space policy and space activity is going to play a significant part in that. So I think we have, in the one sense, we do have an opportunity in the space advocacy community in the UK to press this advantage to say, okay, if you want to play, space is a great area to do that. It's the space economy worldwide is expanding. Opportunities for collaboration are absolutely there. There's a range of stakeholders across the globe who want to take part in space activity. So there's an opportunity to forge partnerships through space activity and see where that leads. I think it's an opportunity to generate economic growth, which we're going to need. So I think, as depressed as I am about the whole political situation, there are nonetheless opportunities which I think the UK government is trying to take. And there are some good people within the Space Agency, within the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, who are trying to sort of jump on that opportunity and seize it as well. So yes, there's going to be problems, there's going to be difficulties. And I think, you know, if you hear arguments to the contrary, then they're being optimistic in the extreme. But nonetheless, I think there are some, you know, significant opportunities there as well.
Why don't we stay on Daniel's question, and just read them out to the other listeners. Daniel asks, the new UK proposed resolution at the UN calls for a study on space security challenges. Any thoughts on what the next steps might be, and what will this study lead to?
A really interesting question, and it's one that I think we've all been kind of asking. Again, this initiative, much as the OneWeb initiative, it took us a little bit by surprise. This was not something that we were expecting. The first we heard of it was a newspaper report in the UK, and it came out of the Ministry of Defence. So it was the Defence Secretary who started talking about this. Now, that immediately kind of sets alarm bells going in my head, because once you start coming at this from a defence perspective, you then state interests start aligning, and you know it becomes very difficult to move it on from a defence question. I was pleased to see that actually it looks like it's the disarmament ambassador, and it's very much a Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office initiative that's being pushed forward. And again, we saw what happened with the European Code of Conduct. It kind of fell a little on stony ground, and the feeling, my initial fears, having not seen the resolution, my fears were this is going to be seen as an attempt by an old imperial power to tell countries how to behave. And I think, we know the dangers of that. And we know that actually in the modern space environment, it just wouldn't wash. So I was very, very relieved and very pleased when I saw that actually what it was more of instituting a global discussion as to what does everybody, what does every nation state think that responsible behavior in space looks like? As I say, sitting this and having this sort of straddling the arms control and the space activity arena, I think is a good idea, because I think actually that's how it needs to be approached, because I think transparency in space operations leads to security. And I think there's no other way around that. So I think in terms of what we can expect, I'm broadly optimistic that this will start a conversation. Where that conversation will lead us, I don't know. But I do think that there's sort of a momentum building around this, around space traffic management, around the way in which we do business in space. We've seen the Artemis Accords for America, so that we're now getting a sense that there's movement. So I think that, it's, again, going back to Brexit, it's an opportunity for the UK to be seen as this honest broker and to try and re-establish its diplomatic credentials. So I think there'll be a momentum behind it in government, and hopefully that momentum can translate itself into something concrete.
Let's continue with some questions from the audience, and I think the next one from Kevin Brisky fits in quite well in what you just said. Could you please comment on the requirements for SSA and STM are in the proposed UK regulation for commercial spaceflight? It seems to be focused on the launch vehicle only, not the payload. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Great question, Kevin. And I think that's one of the things I have picked up on the regulations, that which is kind of understandable, because the regulations themselves are oriented in the direction of civil aviation and the Civil Aviation Authority rather than space environment. So it's not surprising in that sense. I think this is part of a broader conversation that everybody needs to have about space traffic management. I think for too long now, the sources of information about the orbital environment have been behind military firewalls, to borrow Dinz's term. They've been behind military firewalls, and that has led to a lack of transparency. It's led to suspicion, of manipulation of data. And I think that whole thing needs to be thrown out. whenever people talk to me about, you know, sort of renewing and renegotiating outer space treaties, which incidentally I think is a terrible idea, but when we get talk about that, I think the most important thing we can do, the thing that would really revolutionize the way in which space is managed, is by throwing light onto all of that, by making as much information about what's happening in space open source and shared as possible. So I think Kevin, in terms of your question, I think it's part of a much broader discussion that every government and every regulator needs to have, and it needs to be honest with itself about what it knows and what it doesn't know about the space environment.
Great. Let's pick up on Lucas Kuhn's question here, because I think it's a logical track here. And the question is, obviously, the UK is implementing the 4 international treaties. It's ratified, but what about other soft laws, LTS guidelines, or debris mitigation MILAMOS? Are they implemented, and how? And are you looking to other nations' national frameworks like Luxembourg, the US, or Finland? I think it's also a pretty good one.
Yeah, really great question. The way in which
I told you we have an informed audience.
Well, I used to be part of that informed audience, so I'm very happy to be on the receiving end, because it's absolutely brilliant. Lucas, yeah, the way in which the UK deals with its international responsibilities is through the 2 pieces of legislation, that one of which is quite a historical piece of legislation, the 1986 Outer Space Act and the 2018 Space Industry Act. So we do have quite a sizable framework for dealing with space activities. The principal tool by which we deal with that is by means of a licensing process. The licensing process within the space agency. So the space agency will get the application for space activity, it will look at it, and it will make a decision almost on a case-by-case basis. So all of the things you talked about, the long-term sustainability guidelines, the debris mitigation guidelines, all of those different types of things will feed into the licensing process, because the way that it works in the UK is, excuse me, under Section 3 of the Outer Space Act 1986, it's prohibited to conduct unlicensed space activities. So any individual or any company that conducts space activities without a license is liable under the Act. So that's the way they control it. They say, okay, we will license your activity and we will control the terms of that license. So we'll tell you what you can do and what you can't do. And if there's something missing from your proposed mission, we will not give you a license until you put it in there. So when, again, in UK terms, and I'm speaking in the UK, in terms of the UK process here, the debris mitigation guidelines, they are not legally binding in international law. But they can be legally binding if they're wrapped into the licensing requirements. So kind of all of these things feed into the licensing process is my answer to that. So yes, these are all taken into account. There's nothing actually written down apart from a requirement in, I think, Section 5 of the Outer Space Act, which requires the regulator to take account of standard practices and such like. And that's where your LTS and your debris mitigation guidelines come in.
Great. I do have my final question for today. So how will the UK relationship, so we are back to the Brexit topic, how will the UK relationship to the ESAs, and you are still an ESA member, may develop in the future?
Yeah, now that's a really interesting question. I think it's almost impossible to predict how ESA and the EU are going to interact going forward. That poses a significant problem for the UK now that it's left. Again, we're back to the lens of Brexit, because without membership of the EU, a lot of the EU defence programs, they're out. We're not going to be able to take part in them. So we're now in a situation whereby I think there's going to be increasing divergence between the UK national interest and the ESA EU national interest. That is going to pose, I think, some real quite dramatic problems. And I think we've got to address how we're going to deal with that. Because genuinely, I think that's going to cause us a big problem. We're giving a lot of money to ESA, and there's going to be questions about that.
Great. or not great. But I listened very careful when you mentioned defense programs and ESA in one sentence. That was interesting.
Yeah.
So I think we have our 2 more minutes. There are a couple of questions from our friends in India about how are the, or what are the opportunities in your university for doctoral research, and how lucrative is it to become a space lawyer? I mean, okay, you're working in academia. I think that's.
I was going to say it's not as lucrative being an academic space lawyer as it is being one in a law firm. Let's put it like that. But it's a great area to become involved in. If you're interested in an evolving international and national legal system, and a system that's actually really unusual in that it has this duality, I think space law, it allows that real interest to develop. I mean, I'm a constitutional lawyer by training and trade, not an international lawyer. And so my perspective is on the emerging way in which principles of operations are developing, and the way in which the actual granular detail of space is being ironed out. You know, we're moving on from the principles put forward in the Outer Space Treaty, and we're now looking towards, you know, more, as I say, more granular operations. We're talking about space traffic management. We're talking about on-orbit servicing. We're talking about the nuts and bolts, which I think is absolutely fascinating.
I do have to take this last one from Daniel. I can't do. So you're well plugged into the space academia community. Can you recommend 3 promising up-and-coming female experts that we should be watching?
Now, the problem with a list like that is I'm going to miss somebody who I love deeply and who I'm going to offend. So what I'm going to say is there are a number of experts and a number of females who are just the best. My own PhD students, Lauren Napier and Alex Taylor, are just phenomenal. They're looking at really interesting and diverse areas. Lauren's bringing an international relations slant to space activities, and Alex is looking at criminality in space and how we move from the state focus of the Outer Space Treaty to the specifics of the individual. We've got Stacey Henderson in Australia, who is just amazing and pulling together, you know, various international rules on conflict in outer space. We've got Harriet Brettle from Astroscale. We've got Anu Damali from Vertex. So there's a whole range of experts who are just absolutely fantastic, who I would highly recommend following, and who are really providing some amazing insights into what's going on in space. And I hope we get an increasing diversity of voices, because I think actually we're at that turning point of space now. We're a real turning point where we're moving away from the more traditional international law focused debates, and I think we're opening space law up to such a wide range of activity. The more voices we can get in, the better. And you know, this I hope this is a rallying cry for inclusivity, because it absolutely is needed.
Great that you mentioned it. And Kevin also are mentioned here in the Q&A, Jessica West, which I'm really,
Jessica, yeah, absolutely.
It's fantastic. Great. So we are running out of time. One from Vinay about the space law games. Please follow up on SpaceWatch.Global. We try to cover the space law games as best as possible. So everything you want to need or you want to know about it, you will see there. And I'm happy that Chris and his team will provide another great articles about it. I'm quite sure he will. I'm afraid we have to come to an end. As we are short, really very precise as a Swiss company on 33 minutes. So even so, I would like to enjoy our talking with you further, but be sure that we will talk about the topics in future Space Café web talks or in our magazine. Or maybe you will come back again. That would be great as well. So last week we made the announcement of a new series of our Space Cafés. It's called Moriba's Vox Populi. And I thought maybe that Moriba will be in the audience today, but he isn't. So I will do our 30 seconds announcement for that. So this conversation with Professor Moriba Jah will be with people from the space environmentalism, from space security. So there's a huge lineup for the first show, and that's in our 1 hour talk format, free unscripted talk format. And the first show will start on the 8th of October. So it's on Eventbrite already. Get your details there. So our next events are not less interesting than that one, because next week we will have our Dr. Natalia Archinard from the Foreign Affairs Ministry in Switzerland. They have space in the Foreign Ministry. And of course, the current chair of the Scientific and Technical Subcommittee of UN COPIO is talking about Switzerland's contribution to space sustainability. On the 29th of this month, I have the honor to talk with Dr. Babi Allah from the IDA, Science and Technology Policy Institute, on China's recent commercial space developments. And on the 6th of October, I will have the pleasure to talk with Farhad Al-Meiri, the acting executive director of the space sector in the UAE Space Agency, about the wider UAE space economy. All events are online on Eventbrite already. As always, we would like to hear your feedback, so please check in with us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on LinkedIn. Don't forget to sign up to our daily or bi-weekly newsletters, and if you like to treat yourself with something special, become a Space Watcher today. So your support will help us to continue our independent journalism for news and these web talks. Take your credit card and visit our fan shop at shop.SpaceWatch.Global. And thank you very much for your help and your support. Again, thank you very much, or thank you all very much for your interest today. Thank you, Chris, especially for this exciting and inspiring talk and for being my guest. It was a great honor and a pleasure, and I promise you it's not the last time to see you here in the Space Café.
Fantastic.
Thanks again to my entire team behind the scenes for doing this great job week by week again. I hope you all will stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks for joining us. I hope to see you next week. In the meantime, please visit our shop and follow us on social media. And don't forget, become a Space Watcher. Thank you very much. Chris, thank you very much. It was a great honor. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks so much.
Bye.